وليك الحجة بن الحسن صلواتك عليه وعلى آبائه في هذه الساعة وفي كل ساعة وليا وحافظا وقائدا وناصرا ودليلا وعينا حتى تسكنه أرضك طوعا وتمتعه فيها طويلا. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم إني أسألك برحمتك التي وسعت كل شيء وبقوتك التي قهرت بها كل شيء وخضع لها كل شيء وذل لها كل شيء وبجبروتك التي غلبت بها كل شيء وبعزتك التي لا يقوم لها شيء وبعظمتك التي ملأت كل شيء وبسلطانك الذي على كل شيء وبوجهك الباقي بعد فناء كل شيء وبأسمائك التي ملأت أركان كل شيء وبعلمك الذي أحاط بكل شيء وبنور وجهك الذي أضاء له كل شيء. يا نور يا قدوس يا أول الأولين ويا آخر الآخرين. اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تهتك العصام. اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تنزل النقام. اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تغير النعام. اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تحبس الدعاء. اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تقطع الرجاء. اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تنزل البلاء. اللهم اغفر لي كل ذنب أذنبته وكل خطيئة أخطأتها. اللهم إني أتقرب إليك بذكرك وأستشفع بك إلى نفسك وأسألك بجودك أن تدنيني من قربك وأن توزعني شكرك وأن تلهمني ذكرك. اللهم إني أسألك سؤال خاضع متذلل خاشع أن تسامحني وترحمني وتجعلني بقسمك راضيا قانعا وفي جميع الأحوال متواضعا. اللهم وأسألك سؤال من اشتدت فاقته وأنزل بك عند الشدائد حاجته، وعظم فيما عندك رغبته. اللهم عظم سلطانك وعلى مكانك، وخفي مكرك وظهر أمرك، وغلب قهرك وجرت قدرتك، ولا يمكن الفرار من حكومتك. اللهم لا أجد لذنوبي غافرا، ولا لقبائحي ساترا، ولا لشيء من عملي القبيح بالحسن مبدلا غيرك. لا إله إلا أنت سبحانك وبحمدك ظلمت نفسي وتجرأت بجهلي، وسكنت إلى قديم ذكرك لي ومنك علي. لا إله إلا أنت سبحانك وبحمدك ظلمت نفسي وتجرأت بجهلي، وسكنت إلى قديم ذكرك لي ومنك علي. اللهم مولاي كم من قبيح سترته، وكم من فادح من البلاء أقلته، وكم من عثار وقيته، وكم من مكروه دفعته، وكم من ثناء جميل لست أهلا له نشرته. اللهم عظم بلائي وأفرط بي سوء حالي، وقصرت بي أعمالي، وقعدت بي أغلالي، وحبسني عن نفعي بعد آمالي، وخدعتني الدنيا بغرورها، ونفسي بجنايتها ومطالي. يا سيدي فأسألك بعزتك ألا يحجب عنك دعائي سوء عملي وفعالي، ولا تفضحني بخفي ما اطلعت عليه من سري، ولا تعاجلني بالعقوبة على ما عملته في خلواتي من سوء فعلي وإساءتي، ودوام تفريطي وجهالتي، وكثرة شهواتي وغفلتي. وكن اللهم بعزتك لي في كل الأحوال رؤوفا، وعلي في جميع الأمور عطوفا. إلهي وربي من لي غيرك، أسأله كشف ضري والنظر في أمري. إلهي ومولاي أجريت علي حكما اتبعت فيه هوى نفسي، ولم أحترس فيه من تزيين عدوي، فغرني بما أهوى وأسعده على ذلك القضاء، فتجاوزت بما جرى علي من ذلك بعض حدودك. وخالفت بعض أوامرك، فلك الحجة علي في جميع ذلك، ولا حجة لي فيما جرى علي فيه قضاؤك. وألزمني حكمك وبلاؤك، وقد أتيتك يا إلهي بعد تقصيري وإسرافي على نفسي، معتذرا نادما منكسرا مستقيلا، مستغفرا منيبا، مقرا مذعنا معترفا، لا أجد مفرا مما كان مني، ولا مفزعا أتوجه إليه في أمري، غير قبولك عذري وإدخالك إياي في سعة من رحمتك. اللهم فاقبل عذري وارحم شدة ضري، وفكني من شد وثاقي. يا رب ارحم ضعف بدني ورقة جلدي ودقة عظمي، يوما بدأ خلقي وذكري وتربيتي وبري وتغذيتي. هبني لابتداء كرمك وصالف برك بي يا إلهي وسيدي وربي. أتراك معذبي بنارك بعد توحيدك، وبعد من طوى عليه قلبي من معرفتك، ولهج به لساني من ذكرك، واعتقده ضميري من حبك، وبعد صدق اعترافي ودعائي خاضعا لربوبيتك. هيهات، أنت أكرم من أن تضيع من ربيته، أو تبعد من أدنيته، أو تشرد من آويته، أو تسلم إلى البلاء من كفيته ورحمته. وليت شعري يا سيدي وإلهي ومولاي، أتسلط النار على وجوه خرت لعظمتك ساجدة، وعلى ألسن نطقت بتوحيدك صادقة، وبشكرك مادحة، وعلى قلوب اعترفت بإلهيتك محققة، وعلى ضمائر حوت من العلم بك حتى صارت خاشعة، وعلى جوارح سعت إلى أوطان تعبدك طائعة، وأشارت باستغفارك مذعنة. ما هكذا الظن بك، ولا أخبرنا بفضلك عنك يا كريم. يا ربي، وأنت تعلم ضعفي عن قليل من بلاء الدنيا وعقوباتها، وما يجري فيها من المكاره على أهلها، على أن ذلك بلاء ومكروه، قليل مكثوه، يسير بقاؤه، قصير مدته. فكيف احتمالي لبلاء الآخرة وجليل وقوع المكاره فيها، وهو بلاء تطول مدته ويدوم مقامه، ولا يخفف عن أهله، لأنه لا يكون إلا عن غضبك وانتقامك وسخطك. وهذا ما لا تقوم له السماوات والأرض يا سيدي، فكيف بي وأنا عبدك الضعيف الذليل الحقير المسكين المستكين؟ يا إلهي وربي وسيدي ومولاي، لأي الأمور إليك أشكو، ولما منها أضج وأبكي، لأليم العذاب وشدته أم لطول البلاء ومدته؟ فلئن صيرتني للعقوبات مع أعدائك، وجمعت بيني وبين أهل بلائك، وفرقت بيني وبين أحبائك وأوليائك، فهبني يا إلهي وسيدي ومولاي وربي. صبرت على عذابك، فكيف أصبر على فراقك؟ وهبني صبرت على حر نارك، فكيف أصبر عن النظر إلى كرامتك؟ أم كيف أسكن في النار ورجائي عفوك؟ فبعزتك يا سيدي ومولاي أقسم صادقا، لئن تركتني ناطقا لأضجن إليك بين أهلها ضجيج الآملين، ولأصرخن إليك صراخ المستصرخين، ولأبكين عليك بكاء الفاقدين، ولأنادينك أين كنت يا ولي المؤمنين، يا غاية آمال العارفين، يا غياث المستغيثين، يا حبيب قلوب الصادقين، ويا إله العالمين. أفتراك سبحانك يا إلهي وبحمدك تسمع فيها صوت عبد مسلم سجن فيها بمخالفته، وذاق طعم عذابها بمعصيته، وحبس بين أطباقها بجرمه وجريرته، وهو يضج إليك ضجيجا مؤمل لرحمتك، ويناديك بلسان أهل توحيدك، ويتوسل إليك بربوبيتك. يا مولاي، فكيف يبقى في العذاب وهو يرجو ما سلف من حلمك؟ أم كيف تؤلمه النار وهو يأمل فضلك ورحمتك؟ أم كيف يحرقه لهيبها وأنت تسمع صوته وترى مكانه؟ أم كيف يشتمل عليه زفيرها وأنت تعلم ضعفه؟ أم كيف يتغلغل بين أطباقها وأنت تعلم صدقه؟ أم كيف تزجره زبانيتها وهو يناديك يا ربه؟ أم كيف يرجو فضلك في عتقه منها فتتركه فيها؟ هيهات هيهات، ما ذلك الظن بك، ولا المعروف من فضلك، ولا مشبه لما عاملت به الموحدين من برك وإحسانك. فباليقين أقطع لولا ما حكمت به من تعذيب جاحديك، وقضيت به من إخلاد معانديك، لجعلت النار كلها بردا وسلاما، وما كان لأحد فيها مقرا ولا مقاما. لكنك تقدست أسماؤك، أقسمت أن تملأها من الكافرين من الجنة والناس أجمعين، وأن تخلد فيها المعاندين، وأنت جل ثناؤك قلت مبتدئا وتطولت بالإنعام متكرما. أفمن كان مؤمنا كمن كان فاسقا لا يستوون. إلهي وسيدي، فأسألك بالقدرة التي قدرتها وبالقضية التي حتمتها وحكمتها وغلبت من عليه أجريتها، أن تهب لي في هذه الليلة وفي هذه الساعة كل جرم أجرمته وكل ذنب أذنبته وكل قبيح أسررته وكل جهل عملته كتمته أو أعلنته، أخفيته أو أظهرته، وكل سيئة أمرت بإثباتها الكرام الكاتبين الذين وكلتهم بحفظ ما يكون مني وجعلتهم شهودا علي مع جوارحي، وكنت أنت الرقيب علي من ورائهم والشاهد لما خفي عنهم، وبرحمتك أخفيته وبفضلك سترته، وأن توفر حظي من كل خير تنزله أو إحسان تفضله أو بر تنشره أو رزق تبسطه أو ذنب تغفره أو خطأ تستره. يا ربي يا ربي يا رب، يا إلهي وسيدي ومولاي ومالك رقي، يا من بيده ناصيتي، يا عليما بضري ومسكنتي، يا خبيرا بفقري وفاقتي، يا ربي يا ربي يا رب، أسألك بحقك وقدسك وأعظم صفاتك وأسمائك أن تجعل أوقاتي في الليل والنهار بذكرك معمورة وبخدمتك موصولة، وأعمالي عندك مقبولة، حتى تكون أعمالي وأورادي كلها وردا واحدا، وحالي في خدمتك سرمدا. يا سيدي، يا من عليه معولي، يا من إليه شكوت أحوالي، يا ربي يا ربي يا رب، قو على خدمتك جوارحي واشدد على العزيمة جوانحي، وهب لي الجد في خشيتك والدوام في الاتصال بخدمتك، حتى أسرح إليك في ميادين السابقين وأسرع إليك في المبادرين، وأشتاق إلى قربك في المشتاقين، وأدنو منك دنو المخلصين، وأخافك مخافة الموقنين، وأجتمع في جوارك مع المؤمنين. اللهم ومن أرادني بسوء فأرده، ومن كادني فكده، واجعلني من أحسن عبيدك نصيبا عندك وأقربهم منزلة منك وأخصهم زلفة لديك، فإنه لا ينال ذلك إلا بفضلك. وجد لي بجودك واعطف علي بمجدك واحفظني برحمتك واجعل لساني بذكرك لهجا وقلبي بحبك متيما ومن علي بحسن إجابتك واغلني عثرتي واغفر زلتي فإنك قضيت على عبادك بعبادتك وأمرتهم بدعائك وضمنت لهم الإجابة فإليك يا رب نصبت وجهي وإليك يا رب مددت يدي فبعزتك استجب لي دعائي وبلغني مناي ولا تقطع من فضلك رجائي واكفني شر الجن والإنس من أعدائي يا سريع الرضا اغفر لمن لا يملك إلا الدعاء فإنك فعال لما تشاء يا من اسمه دواء وذكره شفاء وطاعته غنى ارحم من رأس ماله الرجاء وسلاحه البكاء يا سابغ النعم يا دافع النقام يا نور المستوحشين في الظلام يا عالما لا يعلم صل على محمد وآل محمد وافعل بي ما أنت أهله وصلى الله على رسوله والأئمة الميامين من آله وسلم تسليما كثيرا.
Jazakumullah. Let us remember in our du'as the marhumin of our families, our community, and the marhumin of the sponsors of today's program. I will recite the names of the marhumin, and we will be reciting Surah Al-Fatiha for them and asking Allah for their forgiveness. Sayyid Hassan Abbas, son of Zuhurul Hassan, Sayyid Nasim Fatima, daughter of Amir Haidar, Sayyid Abdul Hussain Naqvi, son of Mahdi Naqvi, Aliya Begum, Nusrat Naqvi, daughter of Sayyid Askari Hussain, and Sayyid Murtaza Ali, son of Ashraf Ali. For these marhumin, as well as the marhumin of your own families and community, please recite Surah Al-Fatiha after Salawat ala Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala صلوات على محمد وآل محمد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا أبي القاسم محمد. Dear brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. According to some narrations, tonight is the eve of the birth of our 10th Imam, Imam Ali ibn Muhammad al-Naqi al-Hadi alayhim as-salatu was-salam. So in honor of our Imam, a few words about his life and about his teachings. Our 10th Imam, Imam Ali al-Naqi alayhi salam, did not have a very long life. He lived a total of 42 years. But because he became the Imam at the young age of about 8, he spent the majority of his life in the office of Imamat and as the guide and the leader of the followers of Ahlul Bayt. So out of his age of 42 years, about 34 years, one full generation, was spent as the Imam. And he was the second Imam in a row who became the Imam at that young age of less than 10 years old. And this is the wisdom of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to show people that Imamat is not a position of learned scholarship. It is not a position of political or military authority. These were the types of leadership that other schools of thought in Islam, they believed in. The majority of Muslims, who later became known as Ahl Sunnah, they believed in a position of learned scholarship. That is what makes a person worthy of being an Imam. So they would say Imam Abu Hanifa. He was an Imam because he was learned in Islamic law. Sometimes they would say, for example, that Ahmad ibn Hanbal was Imamul Muhaddithin. He was a scholar of hadith. But these are people who learned and then they quoted and taught those ahadith. So for the majority of Sunni Muslims, leadership was a position of learned scholarship. Another very active group at this time was the Zaydi Muslims. They are not as widespread a group today. And so when we think of the major groups of Muslims, we think of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, or we think of the Shia Ithna Ashari, our own 12er school of Shiism. But in history, the Zaydis were a very widespread, a very active group. And in particular, in the time of Imam Ali al-Naqi alayhi salam, because they were living in a time when the Abbasid government had begun to become weak. The caliphs did not have that same power and authority that the earlier Abbasid caliphs had. Mansur al-Abbasi was a very powerful caliph. He could destroy his enemies and enforce his rule. Then after him, you had the caliphs like Harun, Ma'mun. They were very authoritative, powerful. They ruled not just in name, but in actual practice. Afterwards, like many other governments, they began to weaken and the caliph was only ruling in name. That's why the government was moved from Baghdad to Samarra. Because even in their own capital city of Baghdad, the caliphs were not able to control their soldiers and their army, and the citizens of Baghdad began to rebel and complain that the caliph's soldiers are disturbing them in their daily lives, in their business, in their commerce, in their neighborhoods. And so the city of Samarra was made a military town and a capital. Why? Because the caliphs could not control their own army in their own capital city of Baghdad. So what happens when the government becomes weak? Many people say we should overthrow the government. It is unjust, it is evil, we need a revolution. And that was the view of the Zaydis. So they became very popular in the time of Imam Ali al-Naqi because people saw the evil and they saw the weakness of the government. But what they didn't realize is that unless you have knowledge and piety and purity and the same leadership and connection to your leadership, then all of your effort against an evil system might only create a system that is just as evil as the one that you are fighting. Just because one person with power is bad does not mean that if I take his place or her place, I will be any better. Right now, I might not do some of those things because I don't have the ability. But when I have that money and when I have that power, I might be just as bad or I might be worse than the person that I am trying to overthrow. And so, Imam Ali al-Naqi alayhi salam, sallu ala Muhammad wa alihi, he was to oppose both the view of the majority Muslim community, who later came to be known as Ahlul Sunnah, that leadership comes from studying and scholarship. Studying and scholarship are important, but that is not what makes a person the heir of Prophet Muhammad Mustafa sallallahu alaihi wa alihi. And he also had to oppose, our Imam Ali al-Naqi had to oppose the view of those people who said that the Imam is a person who rises up and rebels against the government and starts a movement to overthrow the evil, because that depends on certain conditions. When those conditions are met, then Allah gives the Imam the command to begin his movement. You and I cannot substitute for the role and for the proper place of a ma'asum imam. And one of the ways that Allah helped Imam Ali Naqi in this task is He made him an imam at the age of 8. Now for the Zaydis, they want somebody whose imamat is shown by rebellion, by raising an army with swords. And of course, Imam Ali al-Naqi alayhi salam at that age, it is not socially possible, although the Imam would have been able, not because of any weakness in the Imam's courage or knowledge or ability, but because of the limitations of society. The question of raising an army did not arise. And the question of being somebody who is a scholar because they have studied for 20 years or 30 years in a famous institution of learning, in a madrasa, in a university, that also did not arise, because the Imam was only 8. And in that young age, the Imam showed his knowledge, his wisdom, his worthiness of the position of imamat in such a way that the followers of the previous Imams, the followers of Imam Ali al-Rida alayhi salam and Imam Muhammad Taqi alayhi salam, they followed Imam Ali Naqi without dispute. Sallu alayhi. So this 34-year period of imamat was to complete the understanding of imamat for the Shia. So they know that this is not just a position of political leadership, and it is not just a position of scholarship, but it is a position of divinely appointed ma'asum guidance and leadership. And one of the tasks of our Imam was to prepare people for ghaibah, for the absence of their Imam. Because although there was one Imam before Imam Mahdi alayhi salam, and that was Imam Hassan al-Askari alayhi salam, but Imam Hassan Askari's imamat was very short. It was only about 6 years. So most of the preparation for ghaibah was taking place in the time of the imamat of our 10th Imam, Imam Ali al-Naqi al-Hadi alayhi salatu wassalam. And one of the ways our Imam prepared people for ghaibah was to tell them to refer to ulama. This is the role of ulama, to answer questions and to point people towards the Imam. Not to be a substitute for the Imam, but to point people towards the leadership and the message of the Ma'asum Imam. Once a person came to Imam Ali Naqi in Samarra. Samarra is in northern Iraq, in present-day northern Iraq. And this person came from Ray. Ray is in the vicinity of present-day Tehran, Iran. So for maybe several days, by the means of that time, the person traveled from Ray to Samarra and came to Imam Ali Naqi with a question. In general, it was difficult to reach the Imam, but sometimes when the government's attention was drawn elsewhere, the Imam was able to meet and speak with his followers. So this person, he came to the Imam and asked a question. The Imam answered his question, but then said, from now on, if you have any more questions, then refer to my relative Abdul Azim al-Hassani. Those of you who have gone to Iran for ziyarah, there are two important ziyarat that we do. One is Imam Rida alayhi salam in Masjid, and one is Abdul Azim al-Hassani, commonly known as Shah Abdul Azim in Ray, near Tehran. In addition to other ziyarat that are also recommended, the ziyarah of Fatima al-Ma'suma in Qom, Shah Chiragh in Shiraz. Other ziyarat are also recommended, but these two are the most important ziyarat that we have in Iran. Imam Ali Naqi referred people to Abdul Azim al-Hassani and said that if you have any questions about Islam, then this is somebody who has learned from myself and from my father Imam Muhammad Taqi. And so you can refer to the ulama, the fuqaha, the students of the imams, and you don't have to come directly to the imam. This was preparation to people so that they could be ready for the absence of their imam. They know who to refer to. Another one of the students of Imam Ali Naqi was Uthman ibn Sa'id al-Amri. And many of you may be familiar with the name of Uthman ibn Sa'id al-Amri. He was the first of the 4 ambassadors of our Imam, Imam Hujjat ibn al-Hasan al-Askari alayhi salatu wassalam. Imam Mahdi had 4 ambassadors between him and the Shia before the beginning of the Al-Ghaybat al-Kubra, the major occultation. And the first of them was Uthman ibn Sa'id al-Amri. And Uthman ibn Sa'id was primarily a student and a representative of Imam Ali Naqi alayhi salam. And then he continued in that office during the imamat of Imam Hassan Askari, and then in the beginning of the imamat of Imam Mahdi. So it's a very important time, a very sensitive time, when the government is still oppressing, and even within the Muslim community there are those groups who do not understand the true role of the imamat. And then there is a major test which is about to take place in just a few years after the martyrdom of Imam Ali Naqi, which is the absence, the occultation, the ghaibah of the Imam. And in his time, Imam Ali Naqi met all of those challenges and prepared people for those difficult tests. To conclude, 2 ahadith of our 10th Imam. The first is one that you may have heard from me before. It's a very short and sweet and a very beautiful reminder for all of us. الناس في الدنيا بالأموال وفي الآخرة بالأعمال. Imam Ali Naqi says that in this world people are measured by their wealth. A person who is wealthy is successful. A person who is wealthy is respected. That's في الدنيا. وفي الآخرة بالأعمال. But in the true measure, akhirah doesn't just mean in the hereafter. It means even in this life, in the true measure, our success and our weight is not based on our net worth in terms of money. but it is based on our actions. And this is a reminder for us because some of us, we might never be able to earn billions of dollars, even if we may wish for it. That is not always in our control. But our a'mal are in our control. Regardless of if your parents are rich, if you have access to a good education, if you have good contacts who can put you in line with a lucrative contract or not, those are not always in our control. Some people are lucky in business, some people are not. Amwal, they are distributed according to the wisdom of Allah and not according to our effort or our desire. But a'mal, everybody has the contacts. You don't need to know somebody in government. You don't need to have a special friend. You don't need to have any kind of special luck. Your a'mal are entirely within your control. Rich or poor, in a time of peace or in a time of war, whatever the circumstances may be, you can have the best of a'mal. And if I cannot be a billionaire in material wealth, then I can be a billionaire in terms of my a'mal. Imam says, الناس في الدنيا بالأموال وفي الآخرة بالأعمال. It is the actions that truly measure the individual. And one other hadith of our 10th Imam, he says, Al-itab miftahu al-thaqal. When we criticize each other, when we remark on the mistakes or the shortcomings of each other, that is miftahu al-thaqal. That is the key that opens the gate of not enjoying each other's company and each other's friendship. When I say, you weren't there, you didn't do this, you could have done this. When I start to say that, that opens the gate of pulling people away from each other. And of course, we know that Islam doesn't want us to pull away from others or to push others away from ourselves. So we should avoid itab. We should avoid calling each other out for these shortcomings, for these mistakes that everybody has in one way or another. My mistakes might not be the same as your mistakes, but if I notice your mistakes, I might have others that I don't notice, because none of us is perfect. So avoid itab. But what happens when we avoid itab? In many cases, we avoid saying it and then we bottle it within ourselves. And then it explodes. When something happens, I don't just mention the issue at hand, but I mention last week and last month and last year and everything for as long as I've known you. You always say this, do this. The Imam says that itab is bad because it opens the door for pulling people away from each other. وَالْعِتَابُ خَيْرٌ مِّنَ الْحِقْدِ. But to call it out is better than to hold a grudge. So if you're not going to be able to let go and forgive, then say it. Because at the very least, it'll come to an end. You'll have a fight, then you can make up, you can resolve it. But the best thing is that don't do hiqd, which is to hold a grudge, and don't do itab. Al-itabu miftahu al-thaqal, wal-itabu khayrun min al-hiqd. Calling people out, that opens the gate to separation of friendship. But it's better than to hold a grudge. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us more aware of our own shortcomings and less concerned with the shortcomings of others, and keep our hearts together. And may Allah grant us the tawfiq to seek the best of a'mal and not the largest amount of amwal. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.